Okay, so here we want to clarify today what we started to do, and that's the difference between Asisa Yosher V'Hatov and Kofin Al Midas Dom. So I want to finish up just a few halachas in the Bar Metzra, where you definitely see the contours of Asisa Yosher V'Hatov requires that it be a one-dimensional Asisa Yosher V'Hatov. The minute it starts compromising one person against the other, you can't demand Asisa Yosher V'Hatov if it's good for one person and bad for another person. Okay, and therefore, because of that, we have a lot of contingencies. So I'm just trying to remember how far we got last time exactly. Does anybody have it marked off? I think we talked about selling it on, and about Yerusha. I see that we have that marked off. Right. The most important thing was Chaf Gimel, either Lamed Vav or Chaf Gimel. That was really, we emphasized that again. So we're in Kuf Ayin Hey, either Lamed Vav or Chaf Gimel, Dina de Bar Metzra, Takanas Chachamim Mishum Vasisa, Hatov v'Hayosher, Hoel v'hu Rotze Limkor, Tov v'Yosher, Sheiknena HaMetzran, Yoter Miyodam Acher HaRochog. Okay, that was the basic din, the basic foundation of Dinah de Bar Metzvah, Sisa Yoshev. Does everybody see where I am? I'm in Kuf Ayin Hey. It's either Lamed Vav or Chav Gimel, depending on how you have it numbered. If you have the new tour, it's on page Kuf Mem Hey.
Somebody could again please post the link to the chat. Thank you.
Okay. All right, we got a link up there. But so therefore, lefikach in yesh shum hefsed. This is the key line. Im yesh shum hefsed lemocher lo tiknu shelo tiknu lemetzran davar shu hefsed lemocher. And then the rest of the siman talks about all kinds of examples where if I insist on giving the bar metzra rights, it could end up in the circumstances being at the expense of the mocher and or even the loker. Okay, and one example starts with himhevi. Here we're talking where they're coming together. Usually, if the metzran comes together with the lokeach, the metzran basically squeezes the lokeach out, because why would the lokeach buy it and then enable the metzran to just push him off the land? Therefore, the lokeach is basically wants to compete against the metzran so that he can't be pushed off the land later. And if they come together and the lokeach has some benefit to the mocher to sell to him rather than the metzran, then the lokeach wins and the metzran later can't push him off. Example being, right, that hevi metzran lokeach kol echad ma'osav beni mayu ma'osav shalokeach tovim b'mishkalam oshayu charifin yoser latzeit v'otza batel schus hametzran. An example in our world would be that nowadays in Israel, it didn't used to be that way 30 years ago. Today, if the lokeach would bring shkalim and the metzran would bring euros or dollars, something like that, so clearly the buyer could say, "I'm sorry, I don't want to start patching with dollars and euro. I want money that I can spend right away," and therefore the lokeach would win and the metzran would lose his rights. Meaning the metzran has to come with an equal offer to the metzran. The metzran has to come with an equal offer to the lokeach in order for him to win. Okay, and then he gives other examples of the money of the lokeach is better or more accessible than the money of the metzran. So then the metzran loses his rights. Okay. Okay, and again, once the lokeach wins, the metzran can't come a week later and say, "Okay, now I'm going to give you what you paid." That's not going to be Vasisa Yosher Vatov. Okay, and again, there seems to be a machlokas a little bit about the time delay, and there is then, if you go to Mem, go to Mem. All right, it's right before Chaf Hey. It's between Chaf Daled and Chaf Hey. There's a letter Mem, okay, where Siyam Adoni Avi Arosh Zal Kol Kiyotzi Bezeh Sheyir LeDayan Shu Arma Eno Mevatel Koach HaMetzra. In other words, if the dayan sees that, you know what, the lokech and the mocher have a kanunya, because the mocher just doesn't want to sell to the metzran, and therefore the lokech made a kunz, and we'll see some examples of that. The dayan has the right to give the metzran the rights. Okay, and again, there are a few examples of that later. Let's look at Mem Gimel, because this is a very important halacha l'maisa. And again, it shows you the contours of how, remember, this is legislated Asisa Yashar V'Hatov. Normally, Asisa Yashar V'Hatov is up to you. It's Lifnim Mishuras Hadin. Asisa Yashar V'Hatov is Lifnim Mishuras Hadin. Okay, and the minute it's Lifnim Mishuras Hadin, I should be allowed to decide, I'm not interested in going Lifnim Mishuras Hadin. By definition, the fact that it's Lifnim Mishuras Hadin means it's not the din. But there we said there are a couple of cases where we legislate that you have to go lifnei mishuras hadin. However, here's another exception. Mem Gimel. You see where it says kana halokech livnot ba bayit. And I'm going to wait to make sure everybody finds where I am. Very important halacha l'maisa. Because it says social norms and social priorities or societal priorities. Does everybody see where I am now? It's either Chav Vav or Mem Gimel. It's either going to be Chav Vav or Mem Gimel. Kana halokeach livnot ba bayit. So there's an empty field, and the buyer bought it to build a house. The metzran, the adjacent guy, why does he want it? He wants it because he has an agricultural field next to it, and he wants to expand his agricultural field. The metzran rotze otal lizriya. Again, because we're talking here where the metzran obviously has an agricultural field, and he wants to extend his agricultural field into the mocher's field, so he'll have a nice big agricultural field. And the guy who bought it wants to build a house on that field. So it says here, Eino yochal lesalko. The metzran who wants it for agricultural purposes cannot get rid of the buyer who wants to build a house. Why lafishiyesh yoter yishuv haolam bebinyana debatim mibizriya. Yishuv haolam, the society is better that there be another house rather than there be another agricultural field. So here we introduce here agriculture. We introduce here societal priorities in deciding whether we're going to activate v'asisa yasher v'atov. Okay, and therefore lefikach kasav adoni avi arozal ima metzran rotze linotah. So the Rosh is making a distinction between Zriya, which is a wheat field, and Nitiya, which is an orchard. So according to the Rosh, there are three levels of priorities in the society. The lowest level is a wheat field or a tomato field. The next up is a house, and the highest is an orchard. That an orchard is considered the best use of the property. Okay? But not everybody would agree with that. That's the Rosh. Again, but the point here is, and again, this is going to be why these things unfold into Batei Din and how the decisions in 2025 may be very different than the decisions in 1950, which were very different than the decisions in 1900. It depends what's needed.
But according to just to clarify, according to the Rush, an orchard is better than a house, which is better than a field.
Better than a wheat field or a tomato field, yes, and a vegetable field, yes.
And not everybody necessarily holds to that.
Well, the Rosh wrote that.
Right.
Let me see here if anybody. You want to see the Prisha? The Prisha talks about it. We see the Prisha. Everybody has a Prisha. The Prisha is Ot Mem Gimel. Okay, where the Prisha talks about the fact that which is based on the Gemara. I mean, as the Gemara said, that housing is a better use of the property than agricultural land. Okay, Zeloshan HaGemara bePerak HaMekabel. We saw this Gemara. Yishuv Adif the less beit din de bar metzra. Since a house is better, there's no din of bar metzra. Upirish Rashi Yishuv debati Adif lebeit din below tiknu kan asur v'hatov. Shizu tu tova mizu. We can create hierarchies in Tov because the whole din is built on asisa hayashar vehatov. Well, what's Tov? All Tov is relative. Tov is always relative. The lechara hayanira de'eno ritzon olomar yishuvo shel olam dehalo diktaku biyeshiva ki im biyeshuvo de'eretz Yisrael elahachi perusha Malas yishuv lihiyot matsui la'adam zed dirahi hana'a tfei mizriya. In other words, we're looking at the benefit to the individual. The guy who bought it for a house, he needs a house to live. Okay, and the zriya is for parnasa. The mala de zriya zu yihya benimtza lezek liknot min hashuk. Lecho lecho min hashuk. What do you want to do? You want to plant tomatoes. Okay, you want to plant tomatoes. This guy needs a house to live. Guess what? You want to plant tomatoes, so you should have tomatoes. But you can go to the shuk and buy tomatoes. You want wheat. You can go to the shuk to buy wheat. This guy needs a place to live. Okay, and therefore the place to live is considered more tov than just your ability to plant tomatoes.
Are we assuming, it's funny, are we assuming that he doesn't have a place to live and that's why he wants to buy? Like normally, if I want to buy a house, it's not because I don't have a house. And so, we have to provide me with a house. It's most of the time people are moving from one place.
That's called, you're moving because you need to live in a better place. That's called, that's dira. Dira, in other words, the ability to live. Obviously, that's a good point. I thought you were going to go in that direction, so I will. Is that if the guy's just buying the house for an investment, okay, right? You know, how many apartments are there in Yerushalayim that people bought them and they show up 2 weeks a year? It's a big problem in the city, okay? So if you bought it for that, you're going to show up 2 weeks a year. You're going to build a house and be there, to show 2 weeks a year. Could be then. Again, this is the gray area of Asisa Yasher Vahatov. Asisa Yasher Vahatov is a gray area. All right, and that's where we could negotiate this. but certainly a person who wants to live in the house, for whatever reason, he's building it to live in it. So that's better than the guy who wants to have an agricultural field. But let's just read on in the Prisha, okay? And he also says this is talking about Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. Elachi Perusha Malas Yishuv Liot Matsui Ladam Zed Dirahi Hana Atvei Mizriya. The Mala Dizriya Zuye Benimtza Lize Liknot Ben Ashuk Lecho Mashaen Ken Dira Deina Benimtza Kolkach. V'zeshe Kosav Rashi Adif LeBeitin. Meaning it's better for the Beitin to decide that there should be a house for this person. Ritzono Lomer de Mala Zu Adif V'Shakil Tvei Be'enei HaBeizdin. When it says it's better, what does it mean better? Better is a very, very loose term. Better means the Beitin could assess that this is better for the community than that. Okay? Be'enei Bezdin Me'asiyas Tov V'Yosher Litno Lezel Izriya. Aval Perush Zeh Koshe. In Cain, exactly what we're going to ask on the Rosh. Lama yechashev nitiya hana'at midira. So if the whole point is that, well, you can buy your tomatoes in the shuk, you can also buy your apples in the shuk. So why did we make an orchard at a higher level than living? The Gamid because of Rashi Yishuv ha'olam near the parish kipshuto. Al kain sarch lefarish Yishuv kipshuto v'ainu taima de base de bayit kavua v'kayim tvei mizriya v'ilonos mechuborim v'nishrashim ba'aretz tvei mibatim. But so there's a difference between annually harvested crops and trees, because trees take root and they're there for decades. The spirale, according to the Rosh, the high taima diyesh yishuv tvei shayach afilu b'chutz la'aretz. V'chein kosav beis Yosef de kosav atam de kivan de dina de bar metzra eno ela mishum v'asisa yasher v'atov b'taina koldu dachina le. In other words, the guy bought it. So what we're looking for is we're looking to give the buyer the ability to insulate himself from the bar mitzvah. So with any taina that what I did is better than what you want to do, then that might insulate him. And that's the question, is whether trees is whether a house is better than trees to insulate or no. Everybody agrees that, according to the Gemara, everybody agrees that if you want to use it for an annually harvested agricultural field, living is better. Okay? But, and again, the question was, how do you interpret when it says Yishuv? Does Yishuv mean Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, which is usually what it means? In other words, would we apply the same law in Kansas City and Iowa? Okay, would we apply the same law? Or is it only Eretz Yisrael because we have a concept of we're worried about the Yishuv of Eretz Yisrael? Or do we say, no, it's an objective thing about people, what's beneficial for the people? And that also seems to be a bit of a machlokas. Okay, but let's read just the next prisha. Nitiach shiva tvei mibatim ksas kosher. Afilu loch shiva mibatim elohaya shove hametzron kodem. Why do I listen to this question? Why do I need to say that nitiya is better than houses? All I need to do is say it's on an equal plane. The minute it's on an equal plane, then the bar mitzvah steps in. I'm equal to you, and since I'm a mitzvah, and that gives me the right to move you away. Why does it need to be better? Everybody understand his question? Because again, you've got to realize we're in a world that is requiring the buyer to do a sisa yosher v'hatov, and he has to find a way to insulate himself from the claim of the metzran. And says the Prisha, if the metzran's use and his use are the same, they're equal, then why should he be able to insulate himself from the metzran? V'yesh lomer dahi gufa kamashmala dahavi amina nitiya domel izriya v'hi grua mi binyan kamashmalon deze eno ela afilu adif mi batim. Not only is an orchard better than an annual harvested field, which already would put it equal to batim, but it's even better. Inami bolashmin and agav de shebishnei metzronim also shel netiya kodem. There's another possibility. What happens if there are two metzronim? Remember, we always had two adjacent people. Okay, there's a field and there's two adjacencies, and they both come at the same time. So what do we say? If they both are equal and they come at the same time, they have to split it. Each one gets half the field. So it says here is that if one is coming to build a house. Now, again, we're now talking about two mitzranim. One is going to build a house and one is going to plant an orchard. So if it would have just treated the orchard equal to the house, then they would have to split the field. But we're saying here, no, the orchard is superior to the house, and therefore the one who wants to plant the orchard gets the whole field if there are two mitzranim. Again, this is negotiable in the Rishonim. This is the opinion of the Rosh that the orchard is better than a house.
But why is it one take all? I mean, couldn't you just even if one is better, couldn't you just split it equally if they're both mitzranim?
So that's exactly the point. Is that once again we have another halacha, right? Is that if there are two mitzranim and one came first, he walks away with the whole thing. Okay, if there were partners, they're all equal. They split it. The default is that if all else being equal, and the Meitzranim are equal, and they have to split it. But the minute one Meitzran has an advantage over the other, then he's able to get it. Okay, and remember, you got to remember what's happening here. We're trying to push away the lokeach, right? And or we're coming beforehand to try to buy it, and therefore there are priorities. Who takes precedence? So if they're equal, they split. If one is better, then he gets it. Okay. All right. Let's go now. The important halacha to memhei or kaf ches. We talked about this. The idea was in the Gemara is we want to make sure that the buyer is not pulling kunsin. Okay. Remember, the buyer. What does the buyer want? The buyer doesn't want to be pushed off by the metzra. Okay. The buyer wants to buy and he wants to be there. So he has a way. He has a kunz, how he's going to think ahead. Okay, he knows that Reuven's planning on selling his field down the road. So Shimon, who's not a Metzran, comes in and buys a little piece of land in the middle of the field. So he's surrounded by Reuven, and Shimon is in the middle of the field. Freeze frame. And now Reuven's coming to sell the field. And there's an adjacent guy, Levi, who has an adjacent field. But Shimon's in the middle of the field. So Shimon is really adjacent to the whole field. Okay, so so now when Reuven's coming to sell the field to Shimon, who's already there, he should clearly be insulated from the din of the bar metzra. Everybody understand why that's true?
No.
Again, Reuven has a field. Shimon bought a piece in the middle of the field. So is Shimon now adjacent to all parts of the field?
Yes, so.
Who's more adjacent? The guy who's next door or the guy who's in the middle of the field?
The guy who's next door.
What?
Because the area that he is bordering on is larger than the area of the other guy.
Oh, I never heard that was an issue.
It should be.
No.
If I
You
buy
mean the area he
buy-
owns or the amount of perimeter that he is adjacent with?
I don't remember ever seeing that when one guy borders 30% of the field and one guy borders 7%, there are two fields, one bordering 30% and one bordering 70%, they're both called bari metzra.
So
So
what
let me
was your statement that he's more adjacent?
Yeah, I'm surprised. The
well,
guy.
let me give you some example. Let me give you some examples.
Wait. No. Look, he has adjacency to every side of the field, all four sides of the field. Whereas
Yeah, in an artificial sense, yes.
what?
In an artificial sense, yes.
Wait. Oh, you already assumed something. See, you assumed that there was a knunya going on here.
No, not necessarily. I'm just saying. In a normal, let's say I'm the guy in the border. I have a shared border with you of 400 meters. Okay, let's say the guy in the middle. Let's say he has like a square, a real square. Okay, and on each side of his square, he's got 50 meters. So his entire perimeter is 200, which is only half of what I have. So he's more of a Mitzran than I am? I don't think so.
Absolutely, because being in the middle and having access to all four sides. Okay, in other words, Levi wants to extend his field into Ruvain's, but Shimon is already there, and he just wants to go in every direction, and that's certainly it's very clear according to the halacha. It's very clear. Okay, here, you know what? Here's okay. Here, I'll give you another example. So there's a field, and it's bordered on three sides by Ruvain. Ruvain owns fields, borders on three sides, and Shimon has a border on one side. Okay, I'm not sure, but if they came together, we would probably give it to Ruvain.
Because three sides.
Because he has three sides. Yes, I think so. I'm pretty sure that would be the halacha.
That makes sense.
The Gemara assumes that the guy in the middle has a more powerful bar metzra. You know what? Again, wait. Let's make sure we understand. Right now, at this point, we're not talking about coming together. We're talking about, you'll see in a minute when we get all the details. We're talking about Shimon being there, okay? And a year later, he buys Ruvain's field. And now Levi wants to get rid of him. Maybe you realize that maybe you didn't. They're not coming together. You hear what I'm saying?
Would that make a difference?
Are we going to give? Well, because Shimon already bought it. Shimon bought it. So he wants to insulate himself from the dinah de bar metzra by saying, I'm also a bar metzra. I am also a bar metzra. I got there first, so you can't kick me out.
The only way that could be considered is if you consider that first purchase somehow related to this purchase. So he says, yeah, you bought it.
Exactly the opposite. Exactly the opposite.
Oh.
If we think that the reason Shimon bought a little piece in Ruvain's land is he's not really interested in that little piece. He's interested in buying the whole field and not being kicked out. Remember, he's coming from Japips. He doesn't have any. He's a stranger. Okay, he's a stranger. And if he would buy Ruvain's field, Levi would kick him out in a second. Levi would take it over in a second. So Shimon doesn't want Levi to take it over. So he starts by buying a little piece, so that when he buys the whole field, you can't say that you're going to kick me out because I'm at least equal to you as a bar metzra. Again, it's not talking when they're coming together. I hear what Pinchas wants to say. Maybe when they're coming together, maybe Reuben could make some kind of a claim that he has more skin in the game, more access. But we're talking after the fact, after Shimon bought the land in the middle, and now he's owning the land in the middle, a little bit of land. And then he buys the rest of the land. He should be insulated from being kicked out. So let's see the halacha. Kana halokech ma'at karka be'emtza sad hamocher. Ve'achar kach mochar lo shara karka. All right, so Shimon bought a little piece, and then afterwards Reuven sold him the whole rest of the land. Okay. So mochar lo shara karka shebetzad oso she'emtza. Oh, wait a minute. He's making it even simpler. He didn't sell him the whole field. Okay, I don't have a piece of paper here, but you try to picture it. Shimon went in and he bought a slice of land, a slice in the middle of Reuven's field, and now Reuven's selling the rest of the field on that side to Shimon. Okay, so we're going to see it. He may get kicked out. Why? Roi im oso hama'at shekana tchila hu davar haroi limocher b'fnei atzmo. Meaning, what Shimon bought, it is a piece of property that stands on its own as it's being reasonable to be bought. Kagon shu idis or ziburis. It's much better than the rest of the field, or it's much cheaper than the rest of the field. So then zu shekana b'achrona yesh lo din kishar metzron. Okay. So if we can see that there was a legitimate purchase, the purchase wasn't done to just create an insulation from bar metzra. So then we let Shimon keep the rest of the field. Okay.
Well then,
but let me just finish and then we'll talk. V'im lavshu kemo shara sadeh asvara kivein laharim ve'en lo din metzra. But if we see that Shimon went in to buy a piece of the field, a little piece of the field. Why did you buy a little piece of the field and not the whole piece of the field? Because you don't have the money now for the whole field, but you want to be able, when the money comes in, you're going to be able to buy the rest of the field and not be kicked out. So then we say that's what we call a knunya. You're doing harama. You're trying to trick us, and therefore we will not give him a din of bar mitzvah. There was but now I interrupted a question.
Well, you just introduced another perspective. If he bought it because he didn't have the money, then that's a normal thing to do. To put it into terms I could grapple with, a lot of land is divided up into theoretical plots. Like on the survey that the town has, there's plot 1, 3, 5, they use the same, whatever. There's 5 plots in a row, but often someone will buy 3 of them. So it's like really a triple plot. And someone came along and said, I want to buy the middle one or the left one of your double plot. And that's perfectly legitimate. He subdivides it back down to the original surveying. And then now the rest of it comes up for sale after the guy first downsizes, and now he's giving up all his land. But that was my first thing I wanted to say. That's normal that someone might unless it's a ridiculous subdivision or no one would ever want a tiny little piece of this land except if it was subterfuge.
Dan, you're hitting the nail on the head, and that's exactly what it says here. We have to look and see when Shimon bought that land. Was he buying it so that he can have the springboard to buy the rest and not be kicked out? Remember, Shimon's coming from Japips, so he's a stranger. So we want to know: are you buying this because you want to get the rest of the field and not be kicked out by the bar metzra, or was this a legitimate purchase? And now you are paying another purchase, and that's
right. You used language before that was something else, which was today he can't afford all of it, so he buys what he can afford. That seems to me legitimate.
Well, there has to be a reason why didn't he just buy the whole field? So he didn't buy the whole field because he doesn't want to be kicked out.
Because the guy wasn't selling all of it.
If he bought the whole field right away, then the bar mitzvah could kick him out. So what he did is he came in and bought a small slice. And again, the assumption here is that there was a knunya going on between the seller and Shimon. Because again, always, every time here, it's clear that the seller doesn't want to sell to the Metzron for whatever reason. Okay, for whatever reason there is. That's why we have this conflict. We've always got to be dealing with conflict. Anyway, so let's just read on here quickly. All right. Here's a real kicker. Whoa, wait a minute. Here's the real kicker. So if the neighbors smell that the only reason Shimon bought this small little piece of property in the middle of Reuven's land is because he wants to set the stage to be able to buy the rest of it and be a bar metzra. According to one opinion, I'll say this outside, according to one opinion, the neighbors then can kick him out. They can say, you're not really here to buy this. So they might be able to kick him out right away. Or clearly, when he buys the rest of the field, here's the kicker. When he buys the rest of the field, what can the neighbors do? So obviously what we're talking about, could somebody say, I want to make sure my sound didn't go off.
We hear you.
No, but I know you're going to hear me. A question is if I can hear you, because I have a problem with my sound. Okay, so listen to the possibilities. So the guy, Shimon bought a little piece, freeze frame. Okay, a year later, he buys the rest of the field. So if we're going to say that we sense that there was a knunya here, so the bar metzra can make him leave the rest of the field. What about the original purchase? In other words, can they take over the whole field, even the part that he bought a year ago? Or no, what he bought a year ago, he bought. Obviously, he bought it in order to be a bar metzra. We don't let him benefit from that. But can they also kick him off of that part? Because they want the whole field. That's a machlokas in the poskin. Well, how do we look at that knunya, where we say if we smell a knunya, we're going to deprive you of all your rights, or we're just going to deprive you of the right that you tried to get with your knunya to be a bar mitzvah. That's what comes up here in the discussion. We're not going to go into it because we're not learning here. We went through this a couple of years ago. We did bar mitzvah. What I want to point out here is the balance here of asisa yasher v'atov. Okay. Let's skip now. Yeah. Okay. Again, he talks about what happens if the buyer consults with the bar mitzvah to buy the field or not. We decided that it's possible that the bar mitzvah is telling the buyer buy it so that he can get a fair price, and then right away he can step in. He doesn't necessarily lose his rights, and therefore it could be that the buyer, if he wants to make sure that the bar mitzvah doesn't kick him out, has to get a signed document. I forgo my rights as a bar mitzvah. But let's
in modern times, there's another test of a valid sale. Like you can't just arbitrarily say, I'm going to sell you like this piece of karka. There's minimums, like it has to be a certain lot size, in most jurisdictions.
Okay. All right. Again, we're going back. Again, all of these things are negotiable, and Basin has to make this assessment. Let's skip to either Lamed Daled or Memtet. Very important halacha here. Again, how this plays out. Lamed, it's either Memtet or Lamed Daled. Haya ben hametzer b'medina acheres. Okay, here's the story. Reuben has a piece of land that he's going to sell, and Shimon comes in from outside and buys the land. And Levi, the bar mitzvah, wasn't around. He was on vacation. He was on a business trip. And then he comes home a month later. And he finds out about it. And he wants to remove the buyer. Everybody hear the issue? He wasn't around. He didn't know about it. Haya ben hametzar b'medina acheres o chole o koton ve'achar zman hivri hachole o higdel hakoton o ba lemedina. So any one of those examples where he wasn't able, he didn't know about it, he didn't have the ability, eino yochel l'salko. You can't give that bar mitzvah rights to remove the buyer just because he didn't know about it and he wasn't around. Why not? Very simple. She'imi ata omer kain ein adam kone karka. She'yomer halokeach lacher kama yomim. Takes him many. Nobody will ever buy land. Again, this would be at the expense of the seller. The seller would never be able to sell land. Why? Because he's worried that he'll buy the land today and a month later the bar mitzvah is going to come and kick him out. And therefore, the bar mitzvah, if the bar mitzvah is not there, it's tough. It's his problem. Okay.
Which seif is this?
What?
Which seif is this?
It's either Lamed Daled or Memtet. It's
Lamed Daled.
The older version and Lamed Daled in the newer version.
Okay.
It starts with, it's just a little bit after what we finished before.
Got it.
She'im yata omer kein eram konet karka she'yomer lokech lacher kama yomim takes him mimeni v'kach v'kazeh horu hagaonim. Again, it's all built on asisa yasher v'atov. You cannot activate. The whole thing starts with yasher v'tov of the buyer. The buyer should let go. All right, but if the buyer is going to be able to let go when he didn't even know what's going on, then it's not fair. No one's going to buy, and that would be at the expense of the seller, and therefore we have to insulate the buyer from bar mitzvah once a certain amount of time has passed. How long that is, that's another question. Again, it depends on the society, etc. Okay. Okay, he has a few other examples after that about different how we balance the yasher v'tov of the buyer and the seller. And let me just skip now to another halach we saw in the Gemara, but it makes a lot of sense. It's nun daled or lamed vav. Either lamed vav or nun daled. We saw this in the Gemara, but again, I wanted to show you how we have to make sure that all the circumstances don't undermine the seller. We can't undermine the seller at the benefit of the buyer. I'm sorry, at the benefit of the bar mitzvah. Okay, you see where it is nun daled lamed vav kol nechasav le'echad. So a guy has 10 fields in 10 different places. And there was one buyer to buy all 10 fields. And one of the bar mitzvah in one of those fields comes to that buyer and says, hey, I'm a bar mitzvah. Here's your money and go away. Why? The buyer bought all 10. He wanted to buy 10. He might have walked away if there was only 9. Okay, and therefore it would be at the expense of the seller. Because of Adoni Avi Arozdal, the Metzron comes and says, I'm a bar mitzvah on field A. you bought 10 fields, I'll buy all 10 of them. I'll buy all 10 of them because I need adjacency to this one. We're not going to let him do that. Since if I allow a buyer who buys all 10 to be removed under any circumstances, that will undermine the ability of the seller to sell 10 at once. Because finding somebody to buy 10 fields at once, that's a big chiddush, right? Right up front, you want to sell one office building or you want to sell 6 office buildings. It's pretty rare to find somebody who's ready to buy all 6 office buildings at once. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
Okay, so therefore, when he buys, even if the Metzran's ready to buy it all back from him, he can't force him out. Okay, and therefore, in other words, you there's another point here. Okay, does the buyer have to tell the Metzran that he's coming to buy? Or does the seller have to tell the Metzran that he's selling? You realize that if you're going to make the buyer, the seller, you've got to inform all your neighbors that you're about to sell the property.
But seemingly not, because what if he's out of town? We said that he doesn't have to do anything.
You can't compromise the rights of the seller in order to protect the bar mitzvah. That's the rule. Okay? And so each of these circumstances is something that would compromise the ability of the seller.
Sorry, but do you have to do something like putting up a poster and saying, this land is going to be sold 30 days from now? Any neighbors who have a claim should come right now? Because otherwise they would never know.
What do you think?
You don't have to do anything, because otherwise, if the guy's out of town, then you don't have to call. You don't.
Right. But if I don't do anything, then they'll never know. I can sell it. I can make a deal with Rabbi Karlinsky to sell him my field, and then and we just don't tell anyone about it. And then,
but it's the bar mitzvahs. But it's the bar mitzvah.
The question is an excellent question, but it seemed apparently in those days. Well, I'll try to make it modern in a minute, but in those days, when the field was sold, people heard about it.
Right, like it would be done in front of the elders or something.
Exactly. Okay, again, it talks about when you try to sell it at night. If we smell a kunz, then the guy is vulnerable to bar mitzvah. But if the bar mitzvah just didn't come, you can't compromise the rights of the seller or the buyer unless there's a direct asisa hayashar v'atov.
Yeah. So in today's terms, that would be like putting up a poster. Like someone is looking for a liquor license, so you put up the poster, and the neighbors have 2 months to say something.
I want to reverse that. Today, when you sell a lot, you sell a let's talk about real estate lots, okay? Mm-hmm. So is it a known thing? There's records, there's public records,
right?
Okay,
right.
And therefore, by the way, we've got to assume there's another point here. Again, there's another point here. Does the Metzran want to buy, or he only wants to buy because the seller sold?
Mm-hmm.
We've got to assume that the Metzran was always a Metzran by definition is interested in buying, and therefore he should always keep his ear tuned. Okay, as soon as he hears it's up for sale, he should step in and say, "I want to buy it." And again, and the reason why the Metzran may not do that, as we saw in the Gemara, is he may wait. He knows that it's for sale, but he's not going to be the first offer. Because he knows that if he's the first offer, what's going to happen?
He'll get out offered, outbid.
It's going to be a high offer.
Seller is going to jack up the price.
Right.
Oh, you're the Metzran. You want it? Oh, so as the Metzran, I'm going to pretend to the seller that I'm not interested, but I'm very interested. But I want the buyer to buy it so that I can figure out what the right price is. Again, you see, we've got to balance all of the conflicting elements here.
But it's not the seller's responsibility to call the bar mitzvah and to let him know. Assuming under normal circumstances there's no kanunya, the bar mitzvah's responsibility is to go and get it from the lokeach. Because if he's out of town, then
not only that, one of the halachas we skipped is there was an issue whether the buyer is required to tell the bar mitzvah I'm coming to buy it, and the answer is absolutely not. The buyer clearly has no responsibility to tell the mitzvah, because what would that do? That would undermine the rights of the seller, because if the bar mitzvah has to tell the buyer, then really the seller's scared and he may just not bother with it. Okay, so therefore there's no responsibility for the seller before the sale. It's bad enough that there's a responsibility for the seller after the sale to let go. Vasisa yasher vatov. He doesn't have to do that before. Although, here we get into the practicalities of it. But it may be in his interest to say, wait a minute, I'm going to buy it, and I got to worry that the bar mitzvah is going to kick me out. And that's why we had the Gemara, that the potential seller went to the bar mitzvah and said, I'm thinking of buying the field. Do you agree? Can you help? What do you think? Is it a good buy? And we said, if the bar mitzvah says, it's a great buy, it's so good for you to buy that field, that doesn't say anything. Okay. If the seller wants to be insulated, he's got to get the guy to sign a piece of paper saying,
if the buyer wants to be insulated.
What?
I mean, if the buyer wants to be insulated.
If the buyer wants to be insulated, he's got to go. I'm sorry, I misspoke. Right. The buyer has to go to the bar mitzvah and get him to sign a paper that he's not interested. Because if all the buyer did was he went to the bar mitzvah and the bar mitzvah says, oh yeah, that's a great deal, I think you should buy it. Okay. So then as soon as the buyer buys it, the bar mitzvah can step in and the buyer says, what? You told me to buy it. I'm sorry. I had to tell you to buy it because I needed to get a fair price. Again, we're starting to press. We're pressing the edges of Asisa Yosher Vatov here, okay? But that's again, because this is a legislated din. We have to have defined parameters. Okay, there is another thing we skipped the halach. I'll just say it outside. Is that after the buyer bought it? Okay, so the buyer bought it, and the bar mitzvah now helps him plant grass. He lost his rights. Because once you helped him, that shows that you don't care. Again, we skipped that halach, but that's in there. Let's skip now quickly. I want to finish this up. Just go to the last lines. Okay. It has to do, again, I'm not going to do it inside. It's either samach or mem aleph. I suggest doing it. One of the issues is we talked about selling the land to a goy. So a goy, of course, is insulated from bar mitzvah. So you can't go to the goy and say, Yosher Vatov. But the question is whether it's appropriate for the Jew to sell to a non-Jew, and put a non-Jew on the border of the Jew. In those days, it was dangerous. But the question arises, what happens if the non-Jew is ready to give a higher price than the Jew? Am I saying, I'm sorry, I can't sell to a non-Jew, I have to sell to a Jew? So there, it's basically, it says here in that halach, I'm not going to do it inside because it's going to take us a little bit off track. But in general, the Jew, it comes up. There are two stores selling. One is owned by a Jew and one's owned by a non-Jew, and the Jew charges 10% more money. Do I have to be the customer of the Jew, even if it means paying more money? It's not so simple. Okay. So again, there are parameters. A certain amount, you're not required to pay a lot more, but if it's a little more. Again, that's also Sisei Yosher Vatov. It's also Sisei Yosher Vatov. Okay, but I want to just see the last few words right before Samach Aleph Mem Beis. Right before Samach Aleph Mem Beis. Okay, there are 4 key words. You see where Samach Aleph Mem Beis is. It starts Hamocher Soda Ra. But right before that are 4 words, the end of the previous halacha. Hakol Lefi Ra'ot Hadayan. Judges have to step in and they have to assess the situation and see who's better off. Is it really a Asisa Yosher Vatov? Is it at the expense of somebody else? This is where the judge has to have a very fine-tuned sense of both the realities and business. You got to know what's going on. The dayan has to know what's going on. Okay? And a dayan who doesn't know what's going on really isn't allowed to pass in these kinds of halachas. Okay. Right. Then the rest of the halachas, it talks about when a seller sells out under pressure, right? The seller has to pay taxes or something. A seller who sells under pressure, the buyer who buys from a seller who's selling under pressure, the buyer is insulated from bar mitzvah. Because we don't want to compromise the ability of the seller to have a quick sale. And the minute the buyer senses that he can be removed, it's going to delay the sale. And if the seller is under pressure, and a buyer buys when the seller's under pressure, that buyer is insulated from bar mitzvah. Yeah, I think we talked about that also. Again, all of these things we saw in the Gemara. Let's quickly skip for the next few minutes back to Kuf Ayin Daled. It's not far off, Kuf Ayin Daled. And here's where we're going to get into the halachas of Zenene v'Zelo Chaser. Okay? Everybody realizes that clearly there's no way that we can apply Zenene v'Zelo Chaser to the case of a bar mitzvah. Everybody realizes that, or not so obvious? Can you
Not
say
immediately obvious?
It is or is not?
Not immediately obvious to me.
All right, so I'll make it obvious. when maybe we have to understand.
Oh, I see, because the buyer is chaser. He's not chaser a lot, but he's chaser.
Exactly, the buyer is something. Let's see, when you see what Zenan V'Zol Chaser looks like, you'll understand why we can't even begin to apply Zenan V'Zol Chaser to Bar Mitzvah. So let's open up Kufa and Dalet. Okay, Ha'achim Sheboim Lachlok. I think Daniel.
Where do we open up now?
Kufa and Dalet. One siman before. Okay, if I remember, Daniel was not too happy with this halacha. If I remember correct. Ha'achim sheba'u lachlok, v'shomu hachalakim zeh keneged zeh. All right, now they divided it up. They assessed value of each of the fields, and they made this field's a little bigger because it's worth a little less, and it's a bad location. Whatever. Okay. Ubo lahatil gorolos, meaning we're talking about a big field or 3 contiguous fields. Okay. Ve'echad mehem chafetz be'echad me'achalakim. Right? One of them says, I want this one without a goral. Umala oto. Ve'omer ani eten bo kach v'kach yoser o ma sheshamu'u. So here's the case. There were 3 fields, and each field was assessed at $100,000. And one brother comes in and says, you know what? So there was a $300,000 estate. How are we supposed to divide it? Everyone's supposed to get $100,000 worth of field. Field A is worth to me 110. So therefore, if I take that field and you guys have to take the other 2 fields, I'm ready to give you $5,000 in cash to let me have that field. Because he's saying it's worth 110 to me. So therefore, I have to compensate you and give you $5,000 in cash. Oh, attempt to also bekach bekach. Or, you don't want it. So you give me the $5,000 for me to take one of the other fields. No, he's basically, it's a what is it, a pay to play or something like that. Okay, I think it's worth 110. If it's worth 110 to me, I'll give you the money. You think it's also worth to you, then you give me the money. Shomin lo. He wins. Meaning, im enam rotzim oso ba'oso ilui yitlenahu below goro. In other words, once he offered a premium, he gets it without a lottery, because he's offering a premium. And if they want to match it, it's basically a bidding war. In other words, we assessed each field at 100, and he says, no, this field is worth 110. So you got to bid against me and say, oh, it's worth 110 to you also. Oh, so then good, so I'll take another field and we'll give you this as 110. Because remember, there's got to be an equal division of the assets. If there's $300,000 in assets and one guy gets 110,000, he's got to give the others 10,000, because everybody has to walk away with 100. Are you guys following the dynamic here? Okay. But what happens if this? But now we've got this big field that we're going to divide into 3 parts. And Ruvain happens to own independently a field right next door to the estate. We had this in the Gemara. Right next door to the estate. He bought a field next to the estate. And then the father dies. So now we've got to divide up the estate. Obviously, what does Ruvain want? He wants a third of the estate to be next to his field. Does he want to take a chance with the lottery?
No.
He doesn't want to take a chance with the lottery. So he's saying, look, give me the field next to my field, and then you guys have a lottery on the other 2 pieces. Okay, Bar Metzra. The Omer Tznu Lichelki Etzel Sada Shali below Gora. So Kosav Rambam, in Kulo Shava Idis O Ziburis, all fields are exactly identical. There's no benefit. This field isn't any better than that field. Okay? It's so then Shomin Lo. He wins. Why does he win?
Well, that would be Zenan V'Zelo Chaser.
It doesn't, right? There's no difference to you. And in fact, I'm a Bar Metzra, which gives me a little bit of a better, right? There's an Asisa Yasher V'Atov. All right, and for sure there's a Zenan V'Zelo Chaser. Ve'adoni Ve'arozal Posak She'ein Shomin Lo. Af al pi she'ein chelek echad shava al chavero klum. Ela yicholim lahaloso olav harbe. Af al pi she'eino shave kol kach la'odam acher. Yomru be'einenu hu shave kol kach. Okay? So the Rambam holds that that's a zenen of Zelo Chaser. What difference does it make to you? And there's also, I don't know if we'll mix in, I don't think the Rambam mixes in Bar Metzra. Okay? Now you do remember, maybe we'll back up, I think we're going to have it, but we'll just remind ourselves outside the first Gemara that we saw, was there was a Bechor and a Pashut, because this is really the foundation. You remember we had a Bechor and a Pashut. Bechor is entitled to 2/3, and the Pashut is entitled to 1/3. And there are 3 fields. And the Bechor is allowed to demand the middle field without a lottery. Because the Pashut wants a lottery in all 3 fields. Why does he want a lottery in all 3 fields?
Because he might get the middle one.
And if he gets the middle one, he'll be able then to sell it to the Bechor, because the Bechor at the end of the day wants contiguous fields. So it said there clearly Zen Nene V'Zeh Lo Chaser, and that's clearly that the Bechor gets the middle field without a lottery, and the lottery is on the outside 2 fields. The brother who says, no, I want a lottery in all 3, that's a violation of Zen Nene V'Zeh Lo Chaser.
Which is funny because, of course, the middle field has much more value to the Bechor, right? You know what I mean? To him, it's worth 110,000.
Again, that's the Gemara about. The truth is that might even be. I think now, if I remember, that is a machlokas, which is what's here. Let's go back to this machlokas. Okay. So the Rambam holds that it's a zen and a chaser, just like the Bechor and the Pashut, because at the end of the day, they're all 3 fields are exactly the same, and all you're doing is you're basically squeezing the guy at with no benefit to you. You have no direct benefit because you're going to get a field worth $100,000. So why can't you take a lottery on it? Okay. So, but the Rosh says no. Why? Because, and here we got into the issue of you can't call a zen nene v'zeh lo chaser. Let's remind ourselves of another halacha. All right, we had this about hadar b'chatzer chaveiro shelo b'rshus. You guys remember that halacha? We did that whole sugya. Person lives in a house. You're on the way on vacation, okay, and somebody moves into your guest house without permission, and then you come home. Can you charge him rent? Can you charge him rent? So if he's a person that he didn't need your house, he had no financial benefit from it, and you never rent the house, so you had no loss. Again, assuming there was absolutely no loss, no depreciation whatsoever. So that's a case of zen nene v'zeh lo chaser, and you cannot charge him rent. All right, you remember that? Good morning, Bava Kama. Okay, you can't charge rent if he had no financial benefit. If he was going to have to go to a hotel, so he saved money. Okay, but he didn't. He has plenty. He didn't. He could have. He normally sleeps on a park bench, and that's what he does. But you know what? He saw an empty house, so he went in. And you never rent the house. You can't charge him rent. Can you stop him before the fact? Can he come to you and say, "Midas dom, you have to let me live in your house because it's zen nene v'zeh lo chaser"? So the law is very clear that you can stop him. Wait, but I don't understand what happened to zen nene v'zeh lo chaser.
But you have to say that's a b'diavad.
We're about to say kofin al midas dom means I can force you. That's in this field when we make the pashut give up the middle field. We're forcing him because of zenev v'zeh lo chaser to forego something that he wanted, but it's really of no he's not losing anything by foregoing it, and the other guy is benefiting. But if I would allow you to live in my house because you're not benefiting and I'm not losing, that would be a compromise on my ownership, and that's going to be an important point. I own the house, and if you're going to tell me I have to let somebody live in there without permission, you can force me to let somebody live there. That's a compromise on my ownership. After the fact, we could say, well, since you didn't benefit and I didn't lose, I can't take you to court for money. Okay, that's zen and v'zeh lo chaser. So in the case of the Bechor and the Pashut, again, we're also talking about a lottery here. We're not talking about giving it to him. We're talking about a lottery. So here in this case, what we're saying is that the brothers who have let's say there's 3 brothers. So brother A wants the field that's next to his. The other 2 brothers could say, you're forcing us to forego our rights in that field because if one of us wins it in a lottery, you'll be ready to pay us $110,000?
What's the difference between that and the Bechor and the Pashut? If the Pashut gets the middle field, then he can sell it to the Bechor for a premium.
Because that's a great question. The answer is, again, the answer there is that the Bechor has rights in 2/3 of the field. He has rights in 2/3. So once you have rights in 2/3, you have more rights than the other guy. I have more rights than you because I have rights in 2/3 of the field. Okay. Anyway, but that's exactly the difference. There is that the Bechor has more rights. Here, everybody has equal rights. That's the answer to your question, Doug. Okay. So if you're asking me to forgo my rights, and therefore, but look at the continuation. Okay, so the Ruvain who has the adjacent field, he wants the third of the field next to his field, and they say Mapitom, you want it, you got to pass more. So he says, okay. Then what he's saying is, you know what? I think it's worth to me $102,000. Are you ready to pay me $2,000 to get it without a lottery? And of course, they will say no. So in other words, there's a balance here where if the brothers are just trying to squeeze him, he has a way out. But it could be that they'll say, you know what, you're not offering us enough. And they've got to make an assessment. Basically, we're dealing here with a bidding war. It's a bidding war. That's what's going on. Okay. All right. I think we're going to stop here. We're going to pick this up, and also I'm going to ask you to have a Gemara in Bava Metzia. We're going to go back to another Gemara in Bava Metzia that we didn't see yet, and we're going to also go to the Shulchan Aruch. We're going to see this. We're going to finish Kufay and Dalet, and then we're going to go to the Shulchan Aruch on the Metzia. If you remember, the guy who finds the Metzia that belongs to a Jew, even though the Jew is miyash, he has to give it back. So we're going to see that in Halacha. Again, that had to do with Lifni Mishur Sadin, and I'll send you the link for that. Okay. But meanwhile, so we'll meet everybody. We'll meet up again on Wednesday, Bezrat Hashem. So we'll finish Kufay and Dalet. We'll see the Gemara in Bava Metzia Mem Tes Amud Aleph, and then we will go to the Shulchan Aruch on the Metzia case. I'll send you all the links. Okay, good. Thank you.